Imagine opening your mailbox one morning. Inside is a bill. Not addressed to you. Addressed to your children. And your grandchildren. That is not a metaphor. That is how modern governments pay for today. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When politicians say, we don't want to raise taxes, they're not avoiding pain. They're delaying it. And they're choosing who feels it later. This matters right now because government debt isn't some abstract number anymore. It's larger, faster, and more normal than at any point in modern history. In many countries, debt grows even in good times. Even when unemployment is low. Even when markets are calm. So the obvious question is simple. Why not just raise taxes and pay the bill? The answer isn't moral. It isn't ideological. It's mechanical. And once you see it, it's hard to unsee. Let's start with how governments actually get money. There are only three real options. Taxes, borrowing, or printing money, which is just borrowing in disguise. Taxes are immediate. They show up on paychecks. They change behavior instantly. People notice. They complain. They vote. Borrowing feels different. No new line on your paycheck. No letter in the mail. No immediate anger. Governments borrow by issuing bonds. Think of a bond as an IOU with a calendar attached. The government says, lend me money now. I'll pay you back later. Plus interest. Who buys these bonds? Pension funds, banks, insurance companies, foreign governments, and increasingly central banks. This is where the magic trick begins. When a government borrows, it gets to spend today while pushing the bill into the future. Future taxpayers. Future workers. Future voters who didn't get a say. And politically that's gold. Raising taxes hurts current voters. Borrowing spreads the cost across time. And time is where accountability goes to sleep. But borrowing isn't free. It just hides the cost. To understand why borrowing became the default, we need to talk about scale. Modern governments are enormous. Defense, healthcare, pensions, infrastructure, debt interest. Once these systems exist, turning them off is almost impossible. Raising taxes enough to cover everything would mean visible pain. Immediately. Across millions of people. Borrowing lets governments smooth that pain. At least on the surface. Here's the irony. Borrowing often looks responsible. Even prudent. If the economy is growing faster than the interest rate, debt feels manageable. Like a mortgage on a house that keeps rising in value. For decades this worked. Growth was strong. Interest rates fell. Debt looked harmless. So governments learned a lesson. Borrowing doesn't scare voters. Markets keep lending. Nothing breaks. Until the math changes. Let's slow this down. Every year, governments don't just borrow to fund new programs. They borrow to pay interest on old debt. New debt to service old promises. At small levels this is boring. At large levels, it becomes the system. Now here's the part nobody campaigns on. Taxes are visible and limited by tolerance. Borrowing is invisible and limited only by trust. As long as lenders believe the government will exist, will collect taxes someday, and won't totally collapse its currency, they keep lending. That belief is the real asset. Not gold. Not GDP. Trust. And governments lean on it heavily. There's also a quiet helper in the background. The central bank. When debt grows too fast or markets get nervous, central banks step in. They buy government bonds. With newly created money. Officially, this is called stabilizing markets. In reality, it keeps borrowing cheap and politically painless. This is where hype and reality diverge. The hype says, we borrow to invest in the future. Infrastructure. Growth. Opportunity. Sometimes that's true. The reality is more awkward. A large portion of borrowing pays for things already consumed. Healthcare bills from last year. Pensions promised decades ago. Interest on previous borrowing. That's not investment. That's maintenance. Borrowing from the future isn't always reckless. But it becomes dangerous when it replaces hard choices. Because taxes force trade-offs. Borrowing delays them. And delayed trade-offs don't disappear. They compound. Here's the uncomfortable math. As debt rises, interest payments grow. Interest doesn't care about politics. It doesn't vote. It doesn't negotiate. Eventually, interest becomes one of the largest budget items. Before schools. Before infrastructure. Sometimes before defense. At that point, options shrink fast. Raise taxes sharply. Cut spending brutally. Print money and risk inflation. Or borrow even more. Notice something? Every option hurts someone. Which is why governments keep choosing the least immediate pain. Borrow more. There's a quiet humor in all this. Politicians argue fiercely over tax rates. while debt quietly does the real work behind the scenes. Debt is politically bipartisan. Everyone uses it. Everyone blames someone else for it. Zoom out and the stakes get bigger. When borrowing grows faster than the economy, future growth gets pre-spent. Less room for emergencies. Less flexibility. More fragility. And unlike a household, a government can roll debt forever. Until it can't. History is full of moments where trust suddenly breaks. Interest rates spike. Currencies fall. Budgets snap shut. Those moments don't announce themselves early. They arrive after long periods of calm. That's why this topic matters now. Not because collapse is guaranteed, but because the system depends on belief continuing quietly. Borrowing from the future works only if the future keeps showing up, productive and willing to pay. So here's the final uncomfortable question. If borrowing is just delayed taxation, and if delay keeps getting longer, who exactly is agreeing to pay?